Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're located. Today, we'll be talking about the technology that will drive the retail experience post-COVID-19. We're very excited as we have three great panelists from RetailNext, Rotageek, and Qudini. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Gabrielle Curione. I'm a retail engagement manager with RetailNext, based in New York. Just some housekeeping items here. So letting you know the recording will be available to you if you'd like to access later or share with a colleague. And we welcome any questions you may have, so you can utilize the webinar control panel. In questions, feel free to send them along and we'll be addressing as many as we can at the end of the webinar. So our very first panelist I'd like to introduce is David Payne, who is the Chief Products Officer at Rotageek.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm David. I'm Chief Product Officer at Rotageek. I'll just very briefly introduce our company so you know kind of how we fit into this ecosystem. Rotageek's a staff scheduling, rota optimizing platform. So we take historic data about how busy a shop has been and turn it into forecasts. We turn those into an optimal labor model specific to each store and day down to the 15-minute level, and ultimately turn that into a pre-prepared schedule for every day or week that optimally staffs that model, whilst also fairly allocating the weekends and lates to employees and complying with all employee contract conditions and local labor laws. And that whole proposition is wrapped in a friendly mobile and web app that also allows employees to engage better with their schedule. So that's making requests, keeping up with latest version of schedules, and even adding their personal preferences, so we can really find the win-win solutions that optimally intersect what the business needs from its staff and how they would ideally like to work.
Thanks, David. Our second panelist is Imogen Wethred, who is CEO and co-founder of Qudini.
Hi everyone, my name is Imogen. I'm CEO and co-founder at Qudini. We offer technology that helps retailers to eliminate physical queues, so enabling customers to join a virtual queue from their phone and stay updated while they're waiting, as well as enabling customers to pre-schedule appointments online, and also helping retailers to enable their curbside click and collect experiences. Since the start of COVID, we've been working with a number of retailers on not just how to make their stores better, but how to make them safer and more engaging to customers.
Thanks, Imogen. And our third panelist is Jacobo Ray, my colleague at RetailNext.
Yes, thank you, Abby. Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Jacobo Ray. I'm the Retail Engagement Manager, responsible for the EMEA region of RetailNext. And just to quickly introduce RetailNext, we are the very first IoT vertical integrated solution. And our goal is to bring the e-commerce intelligence into the brick-and-mortar, which means that today we work with more than around 500 customers globally. We help them to fully monitor how customers behave inside their stores. So we, with all this data, our customers understand how the shoppers behave and use that data to really optimize the shopping experience most adequate to their brands and their goals.
Thanks, Jacobo. And just to get a better understanding of how each of these platforms kind of work together, I know Jacobo was going to kind of touch on this piece as well.
Yes, well, I probably during my intro, I already talked about RetailNext, but we at RetailNext, what we do is we connect different data points into one unique platform that makes for the retailers a unique place to combine all these data points and being able to take business decisions based on factual data.
Right. Thank you. So as we start, we thought it would be a great idea to level set. So Qudini conducted a survey a few months ago back. So we want to have Imogen kind of touch on really what we're seeing in the retail landscape in EMEA.
Great. Yeah, so we conducted a survey of 2,000 UK and 2,000 US consumers. It was at the end of September/early October, like just as COVID cases were starting to rise, but stores were still open. It was kind of before this, if anyone remembers what the life before the cases started picking back up again, but things were starting to feel a bit safer. We basically found that customers were still largely avoiding stores. So 64% of consumers said that they were avoiding stores to some extent. They're avoiding stores with kind of higher value products more than any store that kind of served like health or grocery needs were the least avoided types of stores, which obviously makes sense. And I think the kind of financial concerns of customers also played into that, particularly along the millennial and Gen Z customers. Interestingly, we also found that millennial and Gen Z customers were twice as likely to, or 3 times as likely even for Gen Z, to cite environmental concerns as a reason for avoiding stores. And I think that's a really important thing for retailers to be aware of, because I think overall the pandemic has kind of reconfigured where people's priorities lie. Like we've seen that with things like Black Lives Matter, and you're seeing it more and more with environmental as well. So I think we will kind of be coming out of COVID into a new world and a new consumer mindset. And then the main thing that we found for really the reason customers were avoiding stores right now is because of health concerns. When we asked them what kind of initiatives that retailers were putting in that they most appreciated, things like other customers wearing masks and the hand sanitizers were very much appreciated, as were solutions to better manage their experience. So we surveyed them particularly on our solutions, like what did they think of virtual appointments, in-store appointments, virtual queuing and curbside pickup. And we found that interest was definitely, there was interest before COVID, but it's kind of doubled since COVID, particularly for the omni-channel solutions. And again, we found that younger generations were more likely to want these services, and also higher household income groups, which to us kind of leads us to think that COVID will be a catalyst for actually these solutions to become the norm, because it's these younger customers that probably have wanted them all along, but there's been a big impetus for retailers to put them in during COVID.
Thanks, Imogen. This is extremely helpful context as we begin our discussion today on really what the expectations of the customers are going to be go forward in our new retail landscape. So we'll start with our very first question, which is, how has the retail experience changed since the start of COVID-19? And Jacobo, how about we start with you?
Okay, thank you, Gabby. Yeah, so I mean, definitely there has been a before and after in the way COVID-19 has impacted our day-by-day as shoppers, as human beings. So what to say how this has impacted also us as retailers. I think there is no precedent on previous crises on recent history where retail has been forced to fully close down for such a long period. And some of those restrictions are still on our daily routine. So even today, we keep monitoring on a weekly basis what is the traffic evolution of the retail stores for hundreds of customers. And we still see today on a like-for-like a constant decrease on traffic after the hard lockdowns has been finished, of around 50% in Europe and around 25% on the Middle East, on the area that we manage here from EMEA. So imagine how this is impacting the retail sales. So just considering that around 16% are impulse sales. People today, the way we go shopping is we go with a shopping list. We know what we want, we buy it, and then we leave the store. And this means a huge challenge for retailers. All this really unexpected situation has obviously a tremendous impact on how the retail experience is forced to be reinvented. We already mentioned before, but we today have new kind of KPIs that we even knew before. So we talk about occupancy limitations and control, social distance, safety layouts, virtual queuing. So what we see at the end is that those retailers that at somehow they already made the homework on the e-commerce strategy. So I mean they have a solid e-commerce strategy. Those are the retailers that has better resist during this pandemic time. because there is no doubt that the online sales has skyrocketed this year. I wrote a report the other day which said that the expected online share in EMEA, in Europe, will increase 4 decimal points in Europe, which means 2 additional points, more than double that the increase that has in 2019 versus 2018. So, but still we're talking about only 60% of total retail sales. So physical retail is here to stay, and I'm very convinced that that will come to the normal traffic balance. But at the end, having a right balance between the digital and the physical experience, understanding that the stores as an extension of the digital, and also the other way around, and being able to measure, to connect processes, and to understand all this data about how my customers behave in my stores in both universes, is going to be a must for any retailer in order to fulfill what customers demand.
Thanks, Jacobo. David, I'd be curious your thoughts on how the retail experience has changed.
Yeah, well, I guess both the points that Jacobo is making there and Imogen's survey, I guess, sort of reference a few key customer trends, like obviously just the customers needing more of a reason to make a trip to store, so footfall just being in absolute terms down, the times of day that stores are seeing customers, and the sorts of reasons they're changing, obviously kind of partly to do with direct impact of regulations and lockdowns, so restricted trading hours, stores literally being closed for periods, but also indirectly by the fact that people aren't commuting anymore, so the times they're going into store are obviously affected by that. And then when customers get there, they've got this new focus on safety in the way that they visit. And I guess we can add to that as well, employees too kind of have their own new concerns about safety in the way that they work, as well as actually just being sick more often than normal. So they've got all these kind of external factors driving, I guess, what the store, the strategic decision making the store has to make to operate as well as it can. And so I guess we see kind of the impact on the store operations of those various factors affecting things like demand is just a lot harder to predict now because of those changing factors, the sort of the wealth of history you have, the habits that your managers have in store, and the data that you've been collecting for years from your POS and from your footfall counters and so on is sort of harder to use and harder to apply to the future. And you're having to run your stores in a new way, so introduce new roles to manage queues and to greet people at the doors and make sure they're sort of complying with rules and behaving as safely as possible, managing capacity in store and that kind of thing. And another really interesting thing we've seen is kind of cohort scheduling, where retailers want teams of staff to go into store together, the same people on shift with each other, you know, day in, day out, so that you've got the minimal kind of contagion between groups of people working in the store. So I guess we've sort of seen those same trends coming from the regulations and the lockdowns, from employee preferences and from customer behaviour. Those are some of the kind of, I guess, ways in which that's impacted activity and operations in the store.
Great. And Imogen, any final thoughts on this question as well?
Yeah, I think one of the main changes that we're seeing is that experiences that used to be kind of annoying or frustrating but acceptable have now become unacceptable. So things like queuing or things like overcrowding and not managing people, telling them where to be and when to be. And I think that's going to stay, like, even with the vaccine coming out, I feel like this kind of fear of other people is going to be burned into our psyches for a long time. Like, I was in a vaguely overcrowded supermarket the other day, and anytime anyone came near me, I kind of freaked out. And I think that's going to be part of the retail experience for a while, and people are going to want to keep their distance. And we always have. We've always liked personal space, like not being near strangers, and I think that will be massive. I also agree with David on the idea that retail's kind of been flipped on its head. So the fact that people are working from home a lot means that local stores are becoming more important than kind of your central city stores, and how that's going to impact. So we surveyed our own team, our own employees at Qudini the other day to understand what they thought the future of work would be and whether they wanted to work from home in an office. And the interesting thing was not one person said they wanted to move back to a full-time office setup like we had before. So it'll be really interesting to see how that impacts retail and where stores should be in the future.
I agree. Definitely, this year has definitely caused lots of shifts, personal and professionally. So it'll be very interesting to see how those impact consumers go forward. So our second question, what are the important data points retailers should be collecting into 2021? I think this is a great question for Jacobo, as RetailNext is a data provider providing in-store analytics and traffic patterns. So would love to get your thoughts here.
Yes, thanks, Gabby. Yeah, well, first I want to start saying that I have the absolute confidence that the physical retail will not only be recovered by 2021, but will even return stronger and more adapted. Most probably, we'll see there will be fewer, but far better stores than today. So there is something that all retailers will agree with me in the sense that the importance of collecting data. How can you expect to improve something you don't really know? With don't really know, I mean that we rarely today find retailers that are not collecting some piece of data out of their stores. Still, there are some, but I don't think that. So we don't see that this is the rule. And with data, I don't mean just sales, because at the end, sales is the consequence or not of something else, some experience. So what I mean with data is at least to accurately know how many people visit your store, who they are, what they do into my store. And at the end, but more important than collecting data is also that you and your teams know how to do with this data. On my personal experience, I've been a retailer before I joined RetailNext for more than 20 years. And I still remember my very long Excels where I was trying to combine different data points when I'm trying to understand the business of the stores I was managing. So I was having information from traffic, from one solution, from sales, my staffing data. And the main challenge that we still see today is that most of the retailers, most of the retail companies still have multiple silos of data, and those silos usually don't talk to each other. At the end, this means this means for the teams that they have inefficient operational processes, and the consequence of that is that you have your teams spending a lot of valuable time on purely admin tasks, trying to put all this information into a comprehensive manner together, and then you are moving the value time of your teams out of what is really important for the teams, which is just to dedicate to add this personal touch, this personal experience into their stores that only human beings can provide. And I think today here with me, David and Imogen, we have a very good examples of companies that can bring this to this technology that is here to make our life easier as retailers and more efficient.
Yes, so that definitely leads kind of into our next question, right? So, everyone seems data crazed, but it's really important on how we action on that data to make impactful decisions within the store, to drive business, to improve service. So would be curious to hear, David, your perspective on how are retailers leveraging these data points to provide better in-store customer experiences?
Yeah, totally. And I'd love to sort of pick up on where Jacobo left off there. And I sort of, in introducing Rotageek at the top of the call, I guess I very briefly described how, generally for years, Rotageek is kind of the way the platform works is to take in that historic data about when and where and in what way the store is busy and turn that into a forecast and a labor model and ultimately deliver better staffing and better customer service through that. And I guess, yes, to pick up on a couple of things that just came up there, I guess, yes, we totally agree that whilst many businesses may feel that sort of POS data, sales data, gives you quite a lot of information about the past around what you sold and when, but I guess it's limited slightly in that it only tells you about when customers completed a sale, and it doesn't tell you about all of the interactions they went through to get there. So knowing how many people sort of walked into your store and what their movements were and what sorts of areas, zones and roles they dwelt in while they were there adds massively to the richness of that data, because ultimately when customers come into store, and I guess increasingly even pre-COVID, but just through the rise of online and everything else, customers were coming into store very often to engage with the brand and do research and all sorts of things that might not result in a sale, but you still want those interactions to, achieve the level of service that you aimed for. And so it's very important to know when customers are coming into store, where they are, what they're doing, and how they probably want to be interacted with. And so I guess counting the bodies is a much better way of doing that than just counting the sales. So yes, I guess, and sort of to draw that distinction between kind of in general how that data is useful and how the COVID environment we're in now kind of changes that picture. I guess we were saying that, you know, we already think, and in general we would say that collecting that data from the past and doing a good forecast from it enables you to produce a labour model that is often quite different from what you know, sort of on-site local store managers who are doing that process by feel and manually when they're trying to set their staffing levels to meet their customer demand. You'll often get quite a different labour model, ideal labour model out of that analytic optimised process than you will the one that they were doing before. And effectively, managers are leaving kind of inefficiency on the table with the rotas that they're making and the levels of staff that they're putting on, of the order of 5 or 10% of the labour budget sort of could be cut and deliver the same level of service as today, or alternatively, if you're reinvesting that labour, you would expect to see, you know, in a typical retail operation, 1 or 2 percentage points better conversion or basket size just from redeploying that, redeploying your labour in a different way. And it's informed by data. You can't do that without that quite granular data down to the 15-minute, down to the zone, about what customers actually, what service they need and require. And then I guess the last thing I would say on this is that you know, that's a general benefit. That was true before COVID, and I'm sure as retail recovers into 2021, it will continue to be true of a similar order. But there's a sort of special thing going on right now, which is that the data that you've got and the sort of received knowledge, the wisdom that you've got in your stores about how customers are shopping and therefore how best to serve them is too volatile at the moment. It's changing so fast. It's changed as we've had increased regulation and depressed footfall in stores, and it will change again as that footfall comes back with people with their new commuting models and new habits learned through this odd time and everything else. And when patterns are changing that much, you need a very rich recent past data set from which you can extrapolate good forecasts for the near future in a way that, you know, it's just more powerful and more relevant now than it was pre-COVID, than it was a year ago.
Totally agree. Imogen, I would love to hear, I know you made the point earlier that the kind of annoying retail bottleneck operational experiences will no longer be tolerated by customers. So curious to understand your thoughts on how retailers are leveraging this data to then improve.
Yeah, so the data that we help retailers with is kind of the whole store choreography piece. So most retailers will have kind of till data, some have footfall data, and some who are managing kind of rotas as well will have the HR data. We're about kind of also connecting that to how the customer connects between all of those pieces. So if they enter the store, who do they speak to and how long does that interaction take? And therefore, what was that colleagues' time? So you can kind of connect the data with Rotageek to understand what was the colleagues' time spent kind of dwell time versus serving customers versus on tasks via our platform. You can also understand of your footfall, how many customers came into the store, but actually how many wanted to speak to an advisor and what products were they there for. And some of the ways we've seen that kind of change the way retailers do things. Firstly, for one of our clients, we eliminated their need to work with a very expensive consulting company every year to do kind of exit surveys and time and motion studies, because we were just feeding that data into their inbox every single day. So that just helped them to better understand their store operations, but also their customers and what was going wrong in store and what were the friction points so they can improve on those. The other one that is also really big is empowering the store manager. So helping them kind of feel enriched with data. And the insights that we have, the store managers will use, for example, in their one-to-ones or their team huddles to say, like, who's serving how many customers and what are the outcomes of those appointments, and also how long are things taking against what the target time is. So, for example, if a personal shopping appointment should take half an hour, but one store member is taking 20 minutes and the other is taking 40 minutes, it might actually not be good to be 20 minutes. That might be too short, but the 40 minutes might be too long. So what is the kind of the optimum time to serve a customer, and to really kind of work with the team members to improve that.
Great. And I know, Jacobo, you also had a specific example around leveraging this data to better in-store experience. Can we hear your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Actually, and that's a good point, because we, and you know that, Gabby, as a retail engagement managers, we always have the opportunity to work very closely with most of our retailers. And the way we work with them is we help them to understand and to make a meaningful use of the data that we are collecting for them. And I think, what you're showing on the screen now, I think there's a pretty good example of one retailer that we make a very, at the end, it's very simple, but it's very powerful analysis. So what you see here, that's a real use case from a retailer where we're doing analysis on 3 stores, store 1, 2, and 3, you see on the left-hand side. And then you have the typical KPI. So you have the conversion rate and the average ticket value of those 2 stores. Usually, most retailers, this is the information that most of you retailers that are listening to this webinar are managing today. But what about if you can start adding more to understanding why the store 2 has so low conversion rate compared to the other 2? So when we can start adding different touch points, like information about my staffing, and here, David as Rotageek is a good example of how technology can help to integrate all this information, is that when we start having this information integrated, we can activate KPIs like the ratio of customers entering into my store compared to the labor hours that are dedicated, which is the purple line on the right-hand side, which is the shopper per labor hour. Okay, so we see that this KPI basically is telling you what is the ratio of customers per labor hour that you are dedicating into the store. So quickly you see that the store 2, which is the store with the lowest conversion, it has this KPI almost double than the other 2s. Okay, and when you look into the labor hours, this store, we could see that it was really understaffed. Okay? Based on the volume of traffic, which is the blue line, we see that this store, it was not well balanced with this KPI. Okay, and the yellow line, that's another KPI that we also provide, is the shopper yield, which is the value per customer. If you divide the total sales by the traffic, that will give you the value per visitor. Okay, so we see that per visitor, the store 2 was able to get almost half of the other 2 stores. So we will go to the next slide. So this is what the information that we got from the retailer. So we made some recommendations. Obviously, there is more detailed work about saying, okay, it's not just adding hours. Is we should go deeper into, okay, which hours, in which days, which teammates. But at the end, when you are able to connect those dots and do the fine tuning, the result after these actions were that this shopper per labor hour decreased by almost 51%. So it gets more aligned to the other 2 stores. The conversion rate at the same time increased by 27%. So it grows up to the more reasonable level according to the other stores. And also the shopper yield, so the value this retailer gets per visitor, also increased by 53%. Once again, getting more aligned to the benchmark of that retailer. So this is a very basic example of being able to identify an opportunity when you have the right data on the right places, take an action, and measure the impact after that. Okay, and I think now, and a good example, we have. So one example of one retailer that's David, Rotageek, and RetailNext, we both share in that sense, because our technology can be fully integrated. So David, maybe you want to talk about this experience with Sephora Middle East?
Yes, and actually, just before I do, let me just comment on your. I like seeing your analysis charts from before, because for us, I guess we would say they kind of prove the premise. I was talking about our experience across an average, I guess, of kind of lots of customer deployments of that kind of feed data plus our solution to produce an optimal schedule around it. We're saying, we find that you can make schedule hours align better with optimal demand to the order of 5 to 10%, and that translates in, if you reinvest that translates into that 1 or 2% increase in conversion or sales effectively. And analysis like yours, Jacobo, kind of, I guess, proves why that's true, and you're able to kind of test, I guess, that relationship between level of staffing and level of shopper yield in both the ways you showed, kind of comparing across cohorts of stores, sampling, and showing it through time. If you make a change in store 2, you see a response in the shopper yield, and that proves the relationship between the two that I guess everybody knows exists, but being able to quantify it like that helps you know when you're at the efficient frontier of, you know, fine, I can get more optimized in exactly where in the week I spend my labor budget or whatever it may be, that, you know, using a piece of software than using manager instinct. But at what point should I, you know, should we be increasing labor overall? Should we be decreasing labor overall? Very similar to the point that Imogen made about how do you know if a personal shopper appointment should be 20 minutes or 40 minutes? And being able to analyze it using that sort of multifaceted data set like the one that you've got, you know, really helps, I guess, kind of bed these propositions. But yes, so Forum Middle East is, yes, I guess it's a joint customer of ours, right, where you're collecting data in their stores and serving them with those kind of analytics, and we are one of the sort of complementary platforms that takes that data and turns it into rotas, like I was talking about earlier. Yes, we were able to, I guess, transform the way Sephora Middle East made rotas in their stores in that region from, I guess, a much more kind of fixed, you know, they had 4 defined shifts, sort of early and 2 mids and a late kind of thing as a simple pattern they were using in stores. And by freeing up, I guess, making more flexibility around the way that we use data, and then we made a rota that used that data down to its 15-minute granularity. You know, we were able to make the experience for them much more efficient, as well as making it a good experience for staff just moving off sort of older systems and onto something mobile and modern. I think this sort of the performance numbers around how much more efficient that made stores for this particular customer of ours are not public, so I guess I can't talk to them specifically. But I think it's, you know, that, yeah, they've seen the efficiency of making that move, of harnessing the data they're already gathering through RetailNext and putting it into their labor scheduling as well.
Great. I think this is, you know, an example of how crucial technology partners are and their own relationships. So I think one positive out of, you know, current events is the partnership that's come forward between various technology groups, really coming together to share data in efficient and effective ways for retailers. So this is fantastic. So our fourth and final question for this morning is, how do you see customer expectations changing for physical stores in a post-19 environment? So I know, Imogen, you kind of touched on this earlier. Any additional thoughts on, you know, any new expectations that you're expecting to see in 2021?
Yeah, so I think obviously the point about reduced friction and kind of things that were moderately kind of tolerable now becoming less acceptable, like queuing. But alongside that, I think increased convenience for the customer, so meeting customers in the times and places that suit them more. And that was already becoming a thing, but COVID has definitely been a catalyst for, firstly, in-store appointments. More and more retailers are putting that in. But we're also seeing more and more retailers offer virtual appointments that customers can book and connect with an advisor virtually from the comfort of their own home. And pretty much every retailer we're working with at the moment has some kind of element of that or plan to do it. And I think that will definitely remain after COVID, because one of the main things we're seeing is that these customers that book these virtual appointments are not customers that typically go to stores. So retailers are realizing that there's a whole demographic of customers who actually have wanted this all along, and are now engaging with them as a result of these offerings. And then in addition, the curbside pickup, I think a lot of retailers think, oh, if we get the customers to come and pick up their click and collect orders in store, then they're more likely to buy something there and then. So say like 10% will spend an extra £9 or something. But actually we found that customers who use curbside pickup have reported kind of much greater likelihood of buying something in store or online on the future. So I think the overall omni-channel benefit of having these customers able to just collect from outside a store as quickly as they can is bigger, and I think retailers will realize that, and that will remain. And then just generally the new omni-channel behaviors of customers, like when we first surveyed customers before COVID, only 4% of baby boomers use click and collect, But when we said who's going to use click and collect during COVID in order to stay out of stores, every demographic, kind of a third or 35% of every demographic, including baby boomers, said they were more likely to use it. So I think you're going to see more kind of omni-channels amongst the customers who previously were not omni-channel at all.
Thank you. David and Jacobo, any final thoughts here as well?
Yeah, I think, after you, Jacobo, you go first.
No, don't worry. Well, yeah, I totally agree with Imogen in that sense. So definitely, even today, I think, in many cases during the hard lockdown, e-commerce has been the only way of doing business for most of us. And even today, when shopping offline, social distance, occupancy control, gloves, alcoholic gel, contactless payments, safety, all these kind of things has been our experience on the shopping when shopping offline. But also, I think this situation has created good things. Like we have been more creating community with my neighbors and my neighborhood. And also, I feel that it has made more notorious the need of being more social responsible and has more environmental awareness, as well as I think has increased the interest of the people for healthy and eco-friendly products and companies that are adopting those values. I think those things will definitely remain after we overpass this COVID-19. And the customer that has discovered the online will most probably spend more time there than before. And the physical stores and the brands that have the physical stores will need to find a way to connect the online and the offline. So I think there's going to be a rethink of the role of the store. So this buy online, pick up in the store, the stores as a showroom, stores as a delivery center. So all this rethinking of the role of the store is going to be a mass trend. But also, I will not forget about the store teams. I think retailers need to start thinking about investing on the store teams, training them on the new technologies, on the process, or the new connected services will ensure that they are ready for this new so-called new reality. As at the end, the store teams are the best brand ambassadors. And just to finish, I remember there was a report from the Oxford University back in 2013 that they said that they gave in this report a 92% chances that sales assistants will be replaced by robots by 2020. We are ending 2020 even with a pandemic, and this obviously has not been a reality. So the physical store and the contact person, with human beings is definitely here to stay.
Yeah, I think you're both saying, I guess you both said in different ways that some good things have come out of this, and I think that that's true from the consumer. And I, for example, particularly love some of the things Qudini are doing around giving the shopper more control over some of the things that lots of demographics have always wanted control over, and this has just kind of exposed some of that appetite and given them technology is obviously creating options for them. So I think there are lots of good things, and here we are kind of at almost the low point, I suppose, in terms of maximum disruption of stores, most depressed footfall of this process, and much of that will come back next year. And that's an exciting proposition, I guess, for lots of retailers. But I think the tricky thing actually is going to be that some of that customer expectation is going to impose, essentially, it's going to impose extra costs on the store because capacity is still going to be limited. Some of that concern about safety and social responsibility and emptier stores is still going to be there. People who've discovered online and click and collect through this process are going to stick to it a little more than they did before. It's accelerated some of those trends. So there are more costs, arguably, in store now. And slightly less footfall that's going to be coming back to store than pre 2020. So stores have quite a challenge there, I think, to kind of make the economics add up. Even though I think for consumers who are going to stores, the experience will end up being better. But just balancing that sort of cost and volume proposition is going to be a challenge, I think, for some retailers. So I guess that's one of the reasons that we think it's important that people do the best with what they have. You want to sort of make optimal use of particularly the employees that you have, all of those skills, all of that knowledge, retain the staff that are most valuable to your business, start giving them the flexibility that they want, which will make them stick around longer, more performant, and adapt around some of these changing habits like commuting and which stores are busy at what times of day now that have happened. So we think sort of retail operators need to be quite vigilant, I think, going into 2021 about doing that. As footfall comes back, but expectations stay high.
Thank you so much. All right, so we actually have ended our segment. So now we're going to actually open it up to the audience for questions, and I do have a few. So this one actually kind of tacking on to our last point, just kind of thinking of that point you made, David, about being agile and vigilant. As we move into 2021, there might be promise of a vaccine, which we already know it is looking quite promising as of this week, but there's still uncertainty. How can retailers stay agile as store regulations keep changing? So if we think about constant flux, how do we keep our store teams informed, potentially alter our daily operation? Wanted to get your thoughts there.
Is that me, Gabby? I'm happy to sort of have first go at it, but I won't.
Yeah, I think that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I've sort of alluded to what I think are two key things there. One is that as regulation changes around you as a business, knowing what that means. So if there's a change, an imposed change on your opening hours, or there's a change imposed on the sort of general public that we know will have a certain impact on how they travel or how they shop, being able to turn that very quickly into a sort of usable prediction of kind of, so what does this mean in terms of the products I need to have inventory of, the hours I need to be staffed, and these sorts of things. And as I said, kind of increasingly kind of the body of data you have from the distant past is not going to be useful for helping you predict that. You're going to need very real-time, sort of constantly refreshed recent data from during COVID time and from the last few days, that kind of thing, to be able to quickly translate, and the tools that help you sort of dig into that. So to be very quickly able to turn what is effectively like a qualitative regulatory change into, okay, fine, so what does this mean for things I can count and things I'm trying to sort of apply in my store. And the other is the thing that I guess you mentioned there, which is communication. So I guess something we've seen lots through COVID, particularly as stores kind of were forced to close and then allowed to reopen, but only in batches, and then with staff on furlough and all these, and staff being short notice sick more than often and needing replacing, all those sorts of things. I guess that's what we particularly see as a Rota tool. The ability for head office, area managers and store managers to communicate very quickly through mobile devices and the ways that employees like to be communicated to about what is happening and what it means for them, so they always know the latest version of the truth. They're able to ask their questions and they're kept informed, I guess, is more useful than ever. And lots of businesses achieve some of that already through just staff being on WhatsApp together, but having structured data around how that links back to other systems is obviously very useful as well. Those are the two main ones that stand out to me. Maybe the other guys will have other angles.
I think that was definitely quite helpful. We actually have a few more questions. So this one I'll actually direct to Jacobo. You had commented on training for store teams and how crucial that is. How can retail do a better job of marketing itself to make retail a viable career for young people? Wanted to get your thoughts there.
Well, there's something that I don't think that exists today. I don't think there is a retail university any place. So at the end, retail is something that we all learn from, just starting working in a store. But I'm absolutely convinced that the role of the sales assistant is going to evolve. And when evolving means that, and when we realize that they are the brand ambassadors for our brands, and they are the one giving the contact day by day with my customers, retailers that really are going to not only survive of this pandemic situation, but probably they will evolve and be better and stronger, are those retailers that are already starting to invest on the store teams, not only on training, but investing also on the systems they have in place. They will invest on systems to collect the right data at the right times and being able to digest all this data, so they can have this data digested for the store teams to focus. I already mentioned before, to focus on what is really the main task, not dedicating now today, dedicating time of a sales assistant on purely admin tasks, it seems to be like a waste of time and money.
All right, and we have actually a few more questions here. This one's going to be interesting, I think, for all parties to answer. So the audience member said, interesting to hear how each of your different solutions integrates and has different capabilities. Do you have any advice on how to assess various technologies out there? So if you think about, kind of exploratory conversations that you're having, what are some of the questions that you think retailers should be asking you? Wanted to get your thoughts there.
Shall I start with that one?
Sure.
Yeah, so for us, in terms of how they integrate, is very important, and I think a key question when you're talking to potential suppliers. But I'd say the main question should be, well, firstly, kind of what security and data privacy standards they follow, and making sure that they're kind of up to date with those. So for example, like we're ISO 27001 compliant and also following GDPR standards. And I think you can tell this by a lot of the company's documentation. And then I would also say getting references and understanding how they work with customers, because there are quite a lot of software tools out there where they kind of, they're doing enterprise software, but they kind of put it in the retailer's hands and like, there you go, and leave it. And that doesn't always work for an enterprise brand in engaging. So understanding how hands-on that supplier is with their customers. And I think you can only do that through referencing their current customers.
Definitely. David or Jacobo, any thoughts on this process, on exploratory conversations and the right questions to be asking of technology partners?
Yeah, it's a really, I think it's a really good question, quite a hard question, but an interesting one. I think I was trying to think about which, because there's obviously a lot of different ways into that. I guess what I thought maybe would be the most interesting thing to sort of hover on is we find when we're engaging with new customers, I guess people, what's possible in scheduling, particularly sort of modern, optimized, data-driven scheduling, has moved on a lot in the last few years, and lots of businesses who are thinking of making the leap from effectively nothing, from much more basic systems or even bits of paper to a system like ours, might not necessarily know all of the things that are possible and all of the areas of their business they will touch. So I guess one of the things we would say is, like with any project, to be clear about what the sort of what good looks like, what your measure of success is, because I guess we find we're engaged with by retail operations people who are very much focused on, I guess, most of what we've talked about today, which is using your data to serve your customers better. But sometimes it's thought of as a kind of an HR implementation, because it's to do with the way employees engage with the business and indeed their employment contracts and everything else. And it's also an IT system that has to integrate with other IT systems and be safe and secure in all the ways that Imogen also mentioned. So there's all these kind of different stakeholders in an implementation like ours. And I guess to be clear about what you're trying to achieve in each dimension before looking at any of the possible sort of candidate systems is obviously very important. And we find that's often a very interesting conversation, because it's not completely obvious how to balance those stakeholders when you're going in a new direction. And the other thing I would say is, because it's a new science and a new sort of technological area, and I think it's an area that we sort of, let's say, do well in. I think it's something that customers like when they end up selecting Rotageek is nobody's solution is complete and perfect yet. No one has made the version of this that we'll have in 10 years. And so when you're selecting a product, you're selecting something that does what you want now in terms of the change management you want to kind of put your business through, and in terms of how the products stack up against each other in features and everything else right now. But you also want to make a partnership with people who are trying to solve the same kinds of problems that you are in the same kind of way, and have a similar vision for where we might get to with that in 5 or 10 years with technology and business change. We find that the fun part of I guess, being auditioned for new customer prospects.
Definitely. And Jacobo, any thoughts on this here as well about, kind of onboarding and implementing the questions that should be asked?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with Imogen. And on our case at RetailNext, because we mainly rely on video analytics, every time we mention video, that's awake all the privacy alerts. Today, video can fully comply with all the GDPR and all the privacy regulations worldwide. So a good example is we work with hundreds of customers, big ones that are the first one that are requesting us to fully be compliant. But it's true that this many times creates some concerns when we don't know how the technology works. And the other thing I will also agree in this time with David is that one advice, and that's something that we always advise when we sitting with a retailer that is looking for technology, is whatever you choose today, be sure this technology also can be used in the next 10 years. So don't focus on a technology today that is very dedicated to one single thing, because maybe tomorrow your needs will be changed. So who could imagine a year ago how the retail needs will be at the end of this year with this pandemic? So whatever technology you choose today, be sure that this technology is an evolving technology that can also be fulfilling your needs in the future as your business needs will change and will grow.
That's an excellent point. I think, not only about evaluating current state capabilities of technology partners, but also kind of their overall roadmap, how quickly they have made adjustments and growth within their own platforms is definitely key, because as we saw this year, a lot of unexpected twists and turns. So having a partner that is, quote unquote, future-proof is definitely a priority when you're selecting vendors and new technologies to support retail needs.
Absolutely, I think we should be. I think you should be challenging technology suppliers, asking them, okay, what are your latest evolution? So how your product has evolved in the last few months or years. That will prove you that this is a solution that is constantly evolving, or they came up with a good solution 2 years ago and is still showing exactly the same. I think that's a good challenge for us. We love to be challenged.
I agree. I think that's, what brings us together, and even the idea of partnership. So not only improving your own technology, but how open are you to partnering with other technologies, bringing in outside data sources, just to have an overall seamless experience for the retail operators. So I think that was a great example here today with the 3 panelists that we have. The power of integration and partnership is really going to forge its way into 2021. Improving and evolving as best we can with current events that may or may not be expected. So I think that's kind of rounding out the balance of our segment here. We thank the 3 of you so very much for being on with us, and look forward to further discussion after this. Thank all of our audience members for their time, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.